Hey everybody, how are you today? So today we're moving into our new chapter on culture. If you haven't taken our test yet over chapter 1, Sociological Basics, make sure you do that. So culture is a group of people's way of life. And when you're thinking about a group of people's way of life, they have various symbols that they use. It's considered one of the 5 main components of culture. They have different objects that they use that are material objects that really relate to their values, their beliefs, things that are important to them. And so you're going to be kind of thinking about those ideas as you complete journal number 3. Make sure that you don't turn it in yet. Journals aren't actually turned in at the end of the quarter. But I want you thinking about key symbols in America, like our flag, saying the Pledge of Allegiance, the Confederate flag, and kind of, what those, items kind of really show us about being Americans and our culture, way of life. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get into these notes, and then you can start working on your culture of the moon activity as if you are stranded on the moon and you're 200 miles from the rendezvous point and it's going to be difficult to get there. So you really need to think about what objects you are going to really carry with you and what are important, as we're really kind of thinking about material objects that are part of a culture, and for that activity it's at least a space culture. So to start us off, culture is just the entire way of life for a group of people, including all of their ideas, values, knowledge, behaviors, and material objects that they share. So culture, really differs depending on the situation. We, of course, have one mainstream American culture, which you're familiar with, but there's also different subcultures, meaning that there are different groups of people in society that kind of do things their own way, like cults that we'll kind of talk about. There's also people who are considered subcultures who are trying to defy society's ideas and values, their counterculture. And really and truly, there's just a different culture in each environment that you're in, meaning that you behave differently when you're in a classroom compared to when you're at church, to when you're home. There's different kinds of ways of doing things, or what we call norms or normal behavior. As far as what is included in our culture, language is included. And we're going to talk a lot about language over the next couple of days, about how in America, for the most part, we speak English. Although English is not a mandated language, in other cultures, they speak various languages, multiple languages. There are different dialects, there are different slang words. It also may include your medical care. So, do we use what's considered Western medicine? Do we go see doctors? Do we have more of an Eastern philosophy? What kind of religions are practiced? Are people religious? Are they not? Do they have freedom of religion? Every society has children, but there is a question of how do you raise those children? Is the mother in charge, the father in charge, the grandparents? Do they share responsibilities? How do they discipline kids? And we'll continue to look into that kind of concept in our next chapter as well, as we learn about socialization and learning to participate in a group. What foods do people eat in that culture? There's been lots of shows on television over the years about man versus food, and shows where people explore different foods that people eat around the globe because we find them fascinating and interesting and disgusting. And part of this chapter, part of sociology in general, is helping you to teach respect. We don't assume that you're going to love how other people around the world do things. We assume you're going to find them quite strange or bizarre. The goal is for you to respect those people and to understand that perhaps they eat those foods or don't eat certain foods because it's part of their religious beliefs, it's how they were raised, it's where they live, and it's the food available to them in that area. And of course, there's also art. There's celebrations and holidays and certain festivals, which, 4th of July, of course, is not celebrated. We're coming up to Super Bowl Sunday this weekend. Super Bowl Sunday is actually something that is celebrated in Spain and in some European countries and even into Asia, as the Super Bowl is spread and is, covered around the globe. But it's not like everyone's watching the Super Bowl. Of course, the Amish, which is a subculture in America, they're not celebrating Super Bowl Sunday because they don't have televisions. And they really just don't seem to care about some of those mainstream values. Jokes are another category. In America, we love to make fun of old people. I'm not going to lie, we just do. Sometimes people are offended by jokes because of their political nature, their sexual nature. We love toilet humor. We also love old people humor. It somehow brings us together that we make fun of the elderly's driving. That, there's I've fallen and I can't get up kinds of jokes. But in other cultures, they would never make fun of the elderly. They would value the elderly. They would respect them. They would never consider putting them in a nursing home. Manners and gestures are also part of a culture. So in this country, of course, we greet people by shaking hands. But in other countries, they kiss on both cheeks. There's also clothing, the way we dress, the working schedules. There's all these different things that make up a society's culture or way of life. And it really just isn't the culture of a specific country, which was more so honestly a society, because it's a group of people who live in a specific territory. But there could be smaller cultures within a country, is what I'm getting at. Subcultures, like the Amish, countercultures, like the hippies movement in the 1960s, but even just different ways of behaving in each situation. So there are different cultural norms or ways of behaving that we follow and that are taught over time from one generation to the next. As far as some of the other characteristics of culture, what we're going to be learning about this chapter is how culture is shared. It's not like one person just knows a group of people's culture. It is taught. It is shared from one person in that group to other people in the group. And of course, it is learned because someone is teaching it to you. So in our classroom environment, I'm teaching you what's normal as far as I want you to not have your phone out and be on your phone. I'm teaching you to raise your hand before you're supposed to speak. And if someone in the class was violating a norm, you would perhaps, share your sentiments that you felt that was wrong, that something was not being done fairly. If all of a sudden I let a certain student get an A and I failed someone else for no reason, it wasn't even grade-based, I'm sure you would share your opinion. But culture has to be between people, okay? It can't just be an isolated event. And one person is obviously teaching a way of doing things to someone else. Culture is also usually taken for granted. We just assume that everybody else in the world is just like us, but that's not true at all. They eat different foods. They celebrate different traditions. They may look and dress, in a very unique way. So you can never just assume that people do things the way that you do. Otherwise, if you travel around the world, you may find yourselves in hot water where people are mocking you or angry at you because you have violated some sort of cultural norm of way of doing things. There might be some misunderstandings that result because of it. In our culture, there are not only material objects that are very important to us as a society. In our society, it's very technologically based, but there are also symbolic items as well, like our flag, which is very important to us. And of course, some people, as much as some people feel patriotism and love and support for the flag, others have hatred for the flag because of prior U.S. government policies that, have led to racism and mistreatment and inequality, for some people. So there's definitely values that are attached to some of the symbols in America. And so non-material culture is also important. So you're kind of thinking about some of that as you're doing your journal today, and then as you're going to be working on your moon assignment. Culture also varies across time and place. What was normal 100 years ago as far as how we treated African Americans, homosexual Americans, is not the same today. Things have definitely changed. At the same time, though, the more things change, the more they stay the same. 102 years ago, there was a pandemic, the Spanish flu, which should have never been called the Spanish flu because it didn't even originate in Spain. They were just some of the first to report on it since they were neutral during World War I and they had freedom of the press. And, as the Spanish flu, spread throughout the U.S., it ended up killing maybe, 650,000, 700,000 Americans within the year. And a lot of the casualties that resulted from World War I, at least for American deaths, were also attributed to the Spanish flu from H1N1. They weren't just from battle fatigue casualties. And if we look back at those pictures and images, we see people wearing masks. We see a huge debate going on about how do we punish anti-maskers, people who refuse to wear masks, people who are slackers or mask slackers. What do we do with those people? Should we have school in person? Or at the time, it was talked about doing school outside or simply canceling school for a while. How do we move forward? So the more that it changes, in some ways, it also stays the same. Here's just some pictures to kind of reflect upon about how cultures vary around the world to help yet again reinforce the idea that what is common and what is considered normal to us is not normal to the rest of the world. So as we go through this chapter, we're going to be talking about the key components of cultures, how cultures spread, what some similarities and differences. And overall, the goal is to help you to gain respect for other people around the world and how they do things, even though they might be quite different than how we, function here in the U.S. We've got 2 more slides to go. We've got material culture and non-material culture. So when we're talking about material culture, we're talking about the physical objects that are associated with a group of people, the tools they use, the machines, the utensils, the buildings, the clothes, the toys, the artwork, you name it. And, when we're talking about a group of people, these are really the primary sources that these people use. In history class, we've mentioned primary sources before, and how it's usually the documents, the journals, the letters, the political cartoons that people created during their time period, the artwork to really reflect their values, their emotions, what was important to them, what was happening in their lives. But it really also includes the music they listened to, and if there were records, the cars that they drove, the things that you're more typically likely to see in a museum of sorts. But that's all part of the material culture. And if we were going to make a time capsule for 2021, we would include items that reflected what was happening in 2021, who we were as Americans, what our values are, what's important to it, how we lived our lives. So if we were going to make a time capsule for 2021, it would of course have masks in it because that reflects, a current issue that we're facing. But I'm assuming we would also put some type of cell phone in there, whether it was Android or iPhone. That would perhaps be somewhat of a debate. And maybe we would put pictures of favorite cars and, popular fashion. Like last year, it was all about scrunchies, right? Big scrunchies were back. On the toy market, I think this year hot toys were, there's always new Barbies. I think it was Mandalorian toys. I don't even remember what the hot toys were. There are a lot of STEM-based toys, artwork. So there would be different aspects of our society, that we would have to include in that time capsule to reflect who we are as a people. And that would all be kind of aspects of our material culture. And it would give people, insights to who we are, to what we value, to what's important to us. But those are all primary source kinds of objects, which really kind of show our values. Now, on the flip side, there's not just material culture. Here's our last slide. There's non-material culture. So when it comes to non-material culture, we're talking about non-material or symbolic culture. So it's really, the different symbols that, are part of our society that represent our beliefs, our values, our assumptions, our judgments, things of that nature. So as I mentioned before, the flag is a huge part of our symbolic or our non-material culture. And people have all these differing emotions about it, as far as do they love the flag? Do they dislike the flag? They have, varying views about the Pledge of Allegiance. Should we say it every day? Should we not say it every day? The ballot box and voting, that's obviously a symbol in our society as well. So, some people thought that the voting procedure this year worked perfectly fine. Other people thought that there was some kind of election fraud. There was no election fraud, but obviously some people were very, concerned that there was, but the Supreme Court ruled that there was not. And so things kind of proceeded as normally, but, that was something that had to be kind of investigated and taken seriously. But we're lucky in this country that people do get to vote, and they do get to voice their opinion. In other countries, in communist countries, for example, you go to vote, but there's only one person on the ballot. Going through an election is more just a series of motions. There's no real choice in there about who you're voting for. In many of these countries, you see that these people are still in power. They just rename their position. Vladimir Putin in Russia is one of those people. He has renamed his job description multiple times, but he's still the main figurehead who's running the country, really and truly as a dictator, even though he tries to rename his position. But there are different, symbols that really show us what are the beliefs, what are the values, what do these people care about? What do they take pride in? So today was just really trying to get you to understand that what culture is, that it's a group of people's way of life, that culture is something that is shared over time and then it changes, and that it is composed of material and non-material culture. And you're going to be thinking more about the non-material culture as you complete journal number 3 and kind of express in a couple sentences your views on the Pledge of Allegiance and on the Confederate flag. And you're also going to be starting your moon activity. To start your moon activity, you're going to do the beginning part on your own, really, where you're thinking about, okay, if I'm stranded on the moon and I'm 200 miles from the mothership, and I have these objects, and I really can't carry all of them, which ones are important, which ones are not. So kind of put them into that order of importance for now. And that would be a great kind of way to start that activity. Okay, really focusing more so on physical material objects that a group of people might need. And obviously that'd be a very unusual space culture kind of society. Very different than the typical material culture and objects that you use on a daily basis. If you haven't taken your test yet, make sure you get that done. If you never did the Ed Puzzle on culture to intro this chapter, make sure you get that done. But otherwise, that wraps us up for now. Have a great day, guys. Later.